For starters, I've looked at some of your more generalist works, and how would you define a Jew in the year 2010? There's so much diversity. There's so much. What's your sense of that question?
The child of a Jewish mother, or a convert to Judaism.
Okay, that's the bottom line. Okay, but what is the common denominator of the wide variety of people who identify themselves as Jewish today?
That they call themselves as Jewish.
Just that.
That's what they have in common.
Okay.
What they mean by Jewish is very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't use a single category and say if they do this they're Jewish, or if they believe that they're Jewish. You have to leave things very wide open.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But you have to say for what purpose are you making the definition.
Okay. You wrote a book, 1980. So you may still agree or not agree with this. But in 1980, Stranger at Home, the Holocaust, Zionism, and American Judaism, you said, quote, "So if you want to know why be Jewish, you have to remember that 1, the Gentiles wiped out the Jews of Europe, so are not to be trusted, let alone joined. 2, if there had been Israel, meaning the state of Israel, there would have been no Holocaust. And so 3, for the sake of your personal safety, you have to support Israel." Now that you're paraphrasing what the generic view was in 1980.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that today?
Well, I think the attitudes are similar today as they were 30 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And the emphasis on Israel is greater now than it was then. So there's no change in the widespread attitudes.
So how much does the modern state of Israel inform modern Jewish identity, in your view?
Oh, it defines what is important about being Jewish.
Could you elaborate, please, on that? Why? Why does it?
I was just listening to my wife's conversation.
Okay. So.
Well, it's an easily accessible experience. Excuse me, Suzanne. Who was that? Suzanne.
Yeah.
Who was that?
It was today.
Oh, okay. You don't have to read any books or practice any rituals or believe anything to be Jewish by appeal to the state of Israel. And there are very few demands that it makes, because if you're an American, you don't pay their taxes or fight in their wars. So it's the lowest common denominator.
So what percentage of the Jewish community, people who call themselves Jewish, however you determine, would you think subscribe to the central identity, their Jewish identity being Israel, or allegiance to it?
I don't know what public opinion polls look like, so I don't know the answer to that question. But I have the impression that the organized Jewish community bases its emotional life on the Israeli connection.
Could you discuss the conflict between the secularized Jews and the Haredim in both America and Israel? I've read that secular Jews, both here and in Israel, have leveled charges against ultra-Orthodox that are almost classically anti-Semitic. Could you discuss the kind of conflicts that are going on?
Well, I don't know who says this. I don't know what's the basis for the accusation is. The Haredim derive their definition of themselves from the classical Jewish sources, the scripture and the rabbinic literature. And if you want to understand what they say, you have to know what the classic literature, what the Torah says, and you can find that They are the realization in concrete terms of the teachings of the Torah. There's a group called Agudat Israel, which has a spokesman, Avi Shafran, whom I read every week, and I can footnote all of his articles and find references in the rabbinic literature for everything that he says. That's what I mean by the classical affirmations of Judaism.
In this book in 1980, you said, quote, Zionism accepted the premises of European anti-Semitism, and Reformed Judaism also accepted the premises of European anti-Semitism also. What do you mean by that, please? Could you discuss that?
The premises of anti-Semitism?
Yeah. Well, how they were accepted by Zionism.
Well, I'd have to see the context in which that was brought up.
Okay. I think, well, I have to reread it myself, but I think it was the point being that Zionism enormously criticized the Haredim, and actually some of the charges made against the Haredim were almost anti-Semitic in what was said. And you allude to the Reformed Judaism had those kind of critiques also of traditional Orthodox. Could you elaborate?
No, I'd have to see the context in that.
Okay.
Because I couldn't cite the passages, the writings where the Zionism was critical of traditional Judaism.
Okay. Could you discuss Jewish religious orthodoxies, political and administrative influence in the secular state of Israel today?
Well, the most current story is the current legislation on who is a Jew, placing in the power of the chief rabbinate the conversion, all rights of conversion, so that the rabbinate decides who is a Jew by reference to its own law, and that has been severely criticized, and rightly so, in my opinion, because the Haredim are very intolerant of Jews who are unlike themselves.
How did Israel go from a burgeoning Zionist socialism to one that's so rooted in religious faith?
Well, it didn't. I mean, it's still the majority of the population is still not Orthodox in any sense. They keep certain rights in large proportion of the population, but these are not the whole sweep of the rights of Judaism. They're just the fasting on Yom Kippur would be something that most people do. But if you say who keeps kosher or who keeps the Sabbath, it's a minority of the population.
Could you discuss the Chabad organization, generally speaking? How is that the same, and how is it different than other Haredim?
Well, they have their own rabbi, who is supposed to come back from the dead, and who they regard as the Messiah. That separates them from all other Jews.
But in terms of the other generic, the way they dress and so forth and so on, and sort of seclusionary aspects, that is in common with other Haredim?
Yes.
Okay. Could you elaborate on that? What are the other similarities they would have? Why
Well,
are they like that?
90% of the rights of classical Judaism are kept by all Haredim, without differentiation among sects or diverse groups. The differences between the Chabad and Hasidim, Satmar, for example, would have to be looked at in matters of doctrine, but not in matters of practice, where there's a single practice that covers most of the Haredi community.
Could you discuss the tradition, and I don't know much about it, I don't know how to pronounce it, Amalek, in Jewish tradition?
Amalek is the classical anti-Semite who wanted to wipe out the Jews, and he has been identified with Haman in the Book of Esther, and with Hitler.
Okay. Could you discuss what does the Queen Esther and Haman tale celebrate in Jewish tradition?
The salvation of the Jews from the hands of somebody who wanted to kill them all.
Could you give me a little overview, please, of that tale?
That's in the Book of Esther,
Mm-hmm.
and Esther was the daughter of the niece of Mordecai, and she was a concubine to the King of Kings, the Persian Shah, and Ahasuerus, and his major domo Haman wanted to wipe out all the Jews because of jealousy of Mordecai, and Esther managed to intervene and get Ahasuerus to to take away his decree, and so the Jews were saved from mass destruction.
Could you discuss the tale of Jacob and Esau? I don't know how to pronounce it, and how that imports. How important is that to the Jewish tradition? What does it mean, and what happened, and what's the implications?
Well, they were the children of Isaac, Jacob and Esau, and they competed. But the rabbis of the Talmud teach that Esau stands for Rome, and Jacob stands for Israel. And Jacob was a disciple of the Torah, whereas Esau was a violent man.
And does that have any implications for future Jewish history or traditions?
Well, in Genesis Rabbah, there's a considerable discussion of Jacob and Esau, and Jacob is represented as as God's favored continuator of the birthright. Jacob is the favored son.
And what does the other one represent?
Esau represents the violence and strife.
Could you bring this up in this 1980 book too? Also, could you address the issue or the idea of what's called Jewish self-hatred? And you say, quote, Jewish self-hatred and the crisis of identity of modern Jews go hand in hand. Could you discuss this, please?
Yes, there was a book published in 1930 called Jüdische Selbsthass by a person whose name I can't remember at this particular minute. And he said...
Was it Lessing?
Yes, yes, Theodor Lessing. And he said that the Jews absorbed the hostile view of them that they confront in their context and their circumstances, and they hate themselves for the qualities that they think make them Jewish, and they absorb the hatred of the Gentiles. That's what Jewish self-hatred is.
Okay. You also say, along those lines, you say, quote, if we look for pathological, this is in 1980, so you may not even remember writing this, but you say, if we look for pathological cases of Jewish self-hatred among North American Jewry, we should easily find them. But on the whole, self-hatred takes a different form here. It is merely neurotic, but it is not limited to individuals. It characterizes the community as a whole. What do you mean by that? Do you remember?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
The community as a whole is organized and has has community budgets and institutions and programs. And 30 years ago, there was a tendency in the Jewish community to emphasize the the programs that the Jewish community had in common with the Gentiles. For example, hospitals over schools, and the budgets of the Jewish community favored these non-sectarian institutions over institutions that made Jews different from Gentiles and that characterized the Jews as a special group.
Okay. Could I ask you to, getting back to the Haredim, what percentage of Jewry was Haredi, or I don't know how to pronounce Haredim, leading up to the Holocaust? And how influential was it in Eastern Europe?
Well, in Eastern Europe, the community was traditional in large segments, but there were still the Zionism and socialism and secular Jewishness were all traits that were all influential in the community of the Jews in the communities of Judaism of Eastern Europe.
Okay. Well, also from this book, you say a few things, and I'd like to ask you about. You said from ancient times to the 19th century, so going way back in Europe, Jews in Europe spoke their own language, Yiddish, and considered themselves to be, quote, subject to a single sovereignty, that of the Torah. They wore distinctive clothing. They controlled their own sector of the larger economy. They were a caste. I'm excerpting now. Could you discuss that? How did the Jewish community fit, and how was it in relation to the larger society?
In Eastern Europe?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, in the different countries of Eastern Europe, you had a majority population and a minority population, including the Jews. And these were mosaics of groups, of communities, each speaking its own language. In Poland, the Jews spoke Yiddish, and the Poles spoke Polish. And the Jews never imagined that they could be Polish the way American Jews see themselves as Americans. The Jews in Ukraine spoke Yiddish, not Ukrainian, and likewise in Romania and in Hungary. So the Jews were were distinguished by a different language, different religion. They practiced their own professions, and they were a separate group, and right down to the communist, to the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917.
And you described them as a caste, a caste. Would you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
I don't. I'd have to see it in context.
I'm sorry, I'm hitting you with stuff you wrote 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Could you discuss, okay, you say self-segregationist Judaism maintain that the holy people should maintain high walls of separation between themselves and the Gentiles, interacting only in carefully limited transactions, but in no way participating in a common culture of society. So the issue is segregation. Could you discuss that? How prevalent was that?
Well, the Jews were culturally segregated. They were linguistically segregated. They didn't marry Gentiles, and they didn't speak the language of their neighbors. Although they didn't speak the language of their neighbors as their common language, they could speak Polish, but they were not. But their main language was Yiddish.
And this was by choice. This segregational way was by choice.
Well, it was hundreds of centuries of segregated life. When the Jews came to Poland, there wasn't an established Polish nation. They came in, and they spoke their own language, which was German, as they brought it from Germany to Poland, and they lived a segregated life. I mean, they wore different clothes, they ate different food, they pursued different professions. There were Jewish professions and there were non-Jewish professions, and the Jews made their living by practicing the Jewish professions.
So then part of this was the forced segregation by the larger society, and part of it was a self-segregation. Could you elaborate on the degrees? What are we speaking of in terms of the fact that the Jewish community was on it apart, the apartness, which is, again, the nation apart from traditional Jewish texts. Could you just elaborate on all that, please?
What do you want me to elaborate?
On whether, to what degree it was segregation by choice, self-segregation, or to what degree it was enforced upon them.
Oh, I think it was both. It was the Jews' own aspirations to form a separate community that made it natural, but the Gentiles tolerated the Jews and for many centuries, and so it was a mutual arrangement that all the parties to it, to which all the parties involved were equally committed.
Okay. You quote Professor Kasperg in this same book. You say, in Eastern Europe until World War I, orthodoxy preserved without a break in the traditional way of life and the time-honored educational framework. In general, the mainstream of Jewish life was identified with orthodoxy, while Haskalah, Jewish enlightenment, and secularization was regarded as deviations. Could you elaborate on that? In terms of the way that's framed, that quote from Kasperg, which you use, it infers that up to World War I, Jewish orthodoxy sort of ruled the community?
Yes, this was in Russia and in the Russian Empire, which included Poland and Ukraine,
Okay.
and White Russia as well. What was your question?
The issue of to what degree did orthodoxy, Jewish orthodoxy, up to World War I, dominate, or was it dominant over their Enlightenment values?
Well, you couldn't say you couldn't say that there was orthodoxy as distinct from Reform Judaism, or conservative Judaism, or secular Jews. The established patterns were those of the Jewish tradition.
Okay, and that would include the segregational aspects.
The self-segregation was part of the tradition.
Okay. Okay, this is very interesting to me. You say, and this is in Religion, Politics, Culture, Law, and Society. You have an article, oh no, you edited this book. But you say Chabadism was therefore distinctive, yet in its major traits so closely related to rabbinic Judaism as to be indistinguishable except in trivial details. So by that, do you mean that Chabadism was the heart of Judaism?
No, Chabad wasn't the heart of Judaism. It was an expression of the heart of Judaism.
Could you elaborate? What do you mean by that?
Well, it wasn't. Judaism doesn't come from Chabad. Chabad comes from Judaism.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of its principles or tenets of Chabad, the Chabad people, that are classical, are traditional?
They practice the halakhic way of life, and they affirm the classical teachings of Judaism. They add on to these their own additions, but they fit very well. They match the expectations of the tradition in a great many ways. If it weren't for their messianism, they would fit very well into Hasidic orthodoxy.
Now, Chabad is very influential today, correct?
Yes.
Could you discuss that? In Russia, I understand today. Could you discuss their influence in today's world?
They're very devoted to Judaism, and they're willing to make sacrifices, and they offer the younger generation a Jewish calling, where they take a married couple and they send the couple to an obscure location, and they set them there and they say, now here, build a synagogue, build a community. And the people, the husband and the wife and the children, devote their lives to the building of the community of Judaism. That level of devotion is unusual in the world of Judaism.
Back in before World War I, was that also true? Was it unusual, or was that the main force in Eastern Europe? Chabad? Or was
No,
that
Chabad became important in America. It wasn't. It was in Europe. It was one among many Hasidic communities. In America, mainly through the teachings of the Rebbe, they became a unique and a powerful group.
Could you discuss the idea I've heard in Jewish scholarship, the idea of Jewish particularism in contradistinction from, it's always poised against universalism. Could you elaborate on that, please?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, I've heard a phrase called Jewish particularism.
Yes.
And it's, whenever I've seen it, it's in its opposite is held to be human universalism or generic pan-human universalism or something. I guess it has something to do with the segregational aspect of it again?
Yeah, I don't see the question.
Okay, well, I'll skip that one then. Let's see. Okay, this is a quote from this last book. Perhaps it appears to be ironic that a book on American Judaism, your book, has to begin with the encounter with the state of Israel. But the irony is only for a Jew who is not a Zionist. So again, you were discussing, I guess, the issue of Israel's influence in modern Jewish identity. Could you elaborate on that? How crucial is it? How crucial is the Holocaust? And well, actually, you use the term, quote, the Holocaust and redemption, and that redemption is in parentheses Israel. Could you elaborate on that? What you mean by all that?
Yeah, the Holocaust takes the murders of people and turns them into a critical source of attitudes and emotions, and the Holocaust encompasses the experiences of the generation of 1933 to 1945, and treats them as the source of meaning and significance.
So Israel is considered to be a rebirth of some sort?
Israel is treated as the not rebirth so much as I don't want to say compensation, but response to the Holocaust. Israel is the result of it's the result of the Holocaust. in the notion, in the sense that I shouldn't say Israel is a result of the Holocaust, but Israel is the other half of the story of what happened with the destruction of the Jews of Europe.
Now you wrote this was a few decades ago, and I wonder if this is still true. You said, anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism are virtually non-existent among the new generation of Jews. Is that hold true today, or are things changing?
Well, things have changed.
Could you discuss that?
Anti-Zionism is there's hostility to the state of Israel in the younger generation of Jews, and I don't know if you can call it hostility. There's less of an automatic affirmation of Israel, and more criticism. In the past 5 years, there has developed a hostility among younger Jews of the left. But there's still a vast majority of Jews support the state of Israel, and the community of Christians and other Gentiles share this same support.
In recent years, along with what you're saying, there's been a number of scholars who have written about what they call the new anti-Semitism, which seems to be related to criticism of Israel. Can you elaborate on that, your perspective on that, please?
Yeah, it's not criticism of Israel that they object to. It's the delegitimation of Israel that they object to. And this is the Arabs do not concede the right of the Jews to have a state, and well, that says it.
Was that a form of anti-Semitism in your view?
It shades over into a racist anti-Semitism, into a systematic denigration of the state of Israel and everything it says and does.
Okay, you wrote this again a number of years ago. You said, quote, "The Holocaust is the Jews' special thing. It is what sets them apart from others while giving them a claim upon those others. That is why Jews insist on the uniqueness of the Holocaust." Could you elaborate? Do you recall? Could you elaborate on that?
Read it again.
Okay, you said, "The Holocaust is the Jews' special thing. It is what sets them apart from others while giving them a claim upon those others. That is why Jews insist on the uniqueness of the Holocaust."
That seems clear as you said it.
Well, let me ask you then, could you discuss was the Holocaust unique? And why? Why or why not?
Yeah, Stephen Katz wrote a 3-volume work on the uniqueness of the Holocaust, and the assessment of that the Holocaust was unique is an important part of the ideology of the Holocaust. But all catastrophes have unique sides, and you can't say that what happened to the Jews happened only to the Jews. There were other genocides are common to a number of people. The Kurds suffer from the Turks. The Armenians suffer from the Turks. There were the genocides in Africa. So but there were aspects of the Holocaust which had no counterpart in history or in in contemporary life.
Going back a little bit, you said, why is it so important to some in the Jewish community that the Holocaust is considered unique? You made the allusion that that's part of its tenet, or that's part of its, it seems crucial for some, that it's unique. Why?
I don't know, because I don't have that view. I can't explain views that I don't hold.
Okay. Well, could it be something about the whole notion of the special people or the chosen people or something, or no? Is that way off base? Is it the idea? Is there some biblical punishment involved? Let me ask you then, how, that's the next question in any case, how does the Holocaust impact Jewish identity in the modern age?
It's part of the Israel experience to bring children to Auschwitz and then to the Western Wall in Jerusalem. It's a source of religious experience, and it supplies a narrative to the Jews who do not tell about themselves the story of Sinai.
So you're saying for some Jews, perhaps younger ones, the Holocaust is a supplement or something, or not a supplement, but it's instead of another Jewish identity, a textbook, or a reading the original text, or an ignorance of their own history or something? How would you understand that?
It's a substitute.
Substitute. Could you elaborate on that? Why or how? Why would the Holocaust be a substitute?
Because it makes available an experience of emotion, of emotional depth, with very little, making very few demands. You don't have a whole lifetime of obligations to make yourself into to define for yourself a reason to be Jewish and a content to be Jewish. The Holocaust is an easy way of explaining what Jewishness is all about.
Well, how much does suffering or the idea of being victimized and persecuted and all those things, which the Holocaust seems to epitomize, how much does that have to do with Jewish identity in general?
Well, it's part of the identity of the Jews through history, has been the narrative of suffering and of surrender. The Holocaust is not the first time that Jews were murdered for being Jewish.
And do these examples go back into the Old Testament itself? Can we go way back? I mean, Amalek, you said Amalek was an anti-Semite. Amalek.
Yeah, Scripture has the exile, the destruction of the temple in 586, and the restoration of the temple in 530, and the story of exile and return is a paradigm that defines the experience of the Jews as a group, whether in antiquity or whether in modern times.
Could you discuss the concept of galut, exile? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And how that informs Jewish identity. And probably Israel, modern Israel too.
The exile is exile from the Holy Land. And what's urgent is the return to the land as part of the pattern. this goes back to Adam and Eve and the expulsion from Eden, and the restoration of humanity to the land, to the Holy Land, is the other half of the story.
Okay. I have a quote here. You wrote this again 35 years ago, and it's self-explanatory, but I still like your sense. For someone who's not Jewish, this is more difficult, I think, for many people to maybe grasp. But you said this, it's about identity. For my part, you're speaking of yourself, I believe, if I am accepted as a human being and not as a Jew, I do not accept that acceptance. I aspire to no place in an undifferentiated humanity and hope never to see the end of significant differences among men. The only acceptance worth having is of myself as I am, first, last, always a Jew, son of my people as I am son of my father, and, I hope, progenitor of Jews as well. Take me despite my Jewishness, and there's nothing to take. Overlook what is important to me, and you obliterate my being. Could you elaborate? And that's very powerful, a powerful statement of identity. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, it's self-explanatory, but where does that come from?
I wrote it.
Yeah, I know, but where does it come from in your heart, or in the text? The issue I'm asking, I think, the idea, and I think there's many Jewish individuals that the importance of being Jewish is incredible. It's profound, more so than maybe, in my humble opinion, maybe than many other kinds of people. So, could you just elaborate on what does being a Jew mean to you?
It defines my entire existence.
Could you elaborate on that? Why or how? I guess if I was to, go to most of your neighbors, some would be Protestants, maybe other Jews, I'm sure, but Buddhists, what have you. But especially people who are on the secular side, probably would not give much impact into that particular identity, whether they were born a Catholic or a Protestant or a Buddhist or something like that. But this is a profound statement, it seems to me. And I'd like you to sort of elaborate for me where that comes from in your heart. It's sort of a personal question.
Yeah, but I answer it in what I say there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, you said this, quote, Zionism lies at the heart of American Jewry's capacity to affirm its Jewishness. The contributions to Jewry's psychological health by the State of Israel and the Zionist presence in the diaspora cannot be overestimated. You wrote this many years ago again. So this has changed? Or would you...
No, I think this is still true. The American Jews derive their sense of purpose and calling from involvement with the State of Israel.
Now, when you say American Jews, what sort of generalization are we speaking of here? Most American Jews? Because I've seen a lot of people really nitpick about, what percentage of the Jewish community is genuinely Zionist, what percentage support Israel but are not active, and this. So what is your sense of when you say American Jews? How are you using that term, please? And what?
The center and the middle of the middle range of Jews are engaged by Israel to the exclusion of all other engagements, and that's true now. It's more differentiated now than it was, but there's an engagement with Israel which is widespread and which elicits a response from the organized Jewish community.
Part of my interest is in the history of anti-Semitism in this movie, and so you're an expert in Jewish religious texts, at least many of them anyway. So what is the nature of the stuff that anti-Semites have mined from the Talmud? I mean, what is the context that they would take out of context to complain about? Can you elaborate on that?
The Talmud contains a lot of raw material, and they wrote down opinions that represent individual rabbis, but that are not normative. And there are some passages which are not official, but that represent private persons and private prejudices. If you wrote down, it's not a notebook in which people wrote down absolute truths. It's a collection of sayings, and people inserted in the collection some very odd materials. And if you take these to represent Judaism, you represent the norm by the opinions of individual figures.
Which opinions are given credence, or how is that? I mean, this is my ignorance and a lot of Americans' non-Jewish ignorance. How, in all the opinions in the Talmud, how do people come to decide what has merit and what does not? What are the factors involved in that?
The Talmud contains a lot. Contains a lot of arguments and analyses, and you can't you can't take at face value everything you find there. It's a vast document, and it represents a lot of different opinions and positions.
Okay. I just saw on the internet there's a scholar at Princeton, Peter Schaefer, and he's done some work with some text called Toledo Yeshu or something, I don't know, about Jesus. And what do you know about that, and what role has that played in the conflicts about Jesus in the Christian and Jewish community?
Yeah, Toledo Yeshu is a very it's comparable to I'm trying to think of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was made up by the Russian secret police around 1900, and it was a counterfeit that purported to say how the Jews were planning to take over the world. Toledo Yeshu is a collection of scurrilous sayings about Jesus that represents a small group of hateful people. It doesn't speak for Judaism.
Okay. Could you discuss the fiddler on the roof icon? Now, how close, if at all, is that to reality of the Jewish shtetl? I don't know how to pronounce it, but is the fiddler, did you discuss that, the myth of that? Is it in fact a myth, or is there any truth in the way Hollywood portrayed the Jewish community in that film?
It's very emotional, and it's not a photograph. It's a painting.
And how would it be truthful, and to what degree not? I mean, what about that? Is it overly romanticized, or is it pretty close, or what actually would you accept as being factual or alluding to fact, and what parts of that depiction would you find fiction?
Well, it's hard to divide up the focus of a work of art and to say what is fiction and what is fact. The Fiddler on the Roof is a very moving portrayal, but it's not. It doesn't show exactly how things were.
For example, how would be a better depiction of how things were in comparison to that?
Life is with People by Mark Zborowski.
Okay. I've read that in Jewish tradition, you wrote it too. You say, once born an Israelite, one could never stop being an Israelite, no matter what he or she did, affirmed, or denied. So is it true then that in Jewish tradition, that if you're born Jewish, no matter what you do, almost, you will still be Jewish?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that? So you have people who call themselves Jewish Buddhists and so forth and so on. So I can't imagine someone calling themselves a Protestant Buddhist or a Catholic Buddhist, but in the Jewish community that exists. Could you explain that, please?
If a Jew converts to another religion and wants to return to Judaism, does he have to go through a rite of reversion? No, he doesn't. He never stops being a Jew. That's what Jewish law maintains.
And traditionally, a Jew is born of a Jewish mother, correct? I mean, could you elaborate on that? Why? What's the meaning of it? Why, if your father wasn't Jewish, why wouldn't you be a Jewish then? And what's the whole kind of religious logic for all that? Do you know?
Being an Israelite passes through the female line. That's in Jewish law. The Reform and Reconstructionist Judaisms hold that would apply to the father as well, but from antiquity onward, it has been attributed to the mother, and that continues today.
Could you elaborate? I mean, I wanted to ask you, I've heard references to the claim that some Jews from Eastern Europe were Khazars, and they converted to Judaism. Is that given any credibility in the scholarly world, or is that a fiction?
I haven't followed that debate. It's hard to say. The evidence is that the Jews in Eastern Europe derived from the Khazars is not compelling.
What is the Jewish, for the average non-Jew who doesn't know too much, is Judaism a this life religion, in the sense that what is the Jewish concept? The Christians have their notion of heaven and afterlife. And as I understand it, the Jewish community expects the Messiah to come here. So could you discuss the differences in the Christian worldview and the Jewish worldview about that?
The Torah teaches that in the end of days, the Israelites will be restored to the land of Israel. And this is like Adam going back to Eden. So that with the resurrection of the dead, the Israelites will be restored to Jerusalem.
Okay. You wrote, this is way back many years ago, you wrote, and this is about conversion, and you wrote that converts in Britain, the USA, and the state of Israel, alas, tell stories of feeling excluded or taking a second-class position within Jewry. And my question is, I've heard that, that people who would like to, Judaism does not proselytize, correct? And so those individuals who do convert, maybe, is it possible they feel slighted in the sense that being Jewish is largely considered by many people to be a birthright? Could you elaborate on the tensions or problems with the conversion aspect, please?
What's your question?
What has been the experience of converts to Judaism? Are they considered second-class citizens, second-class Jews by many Jews, because they weren't born Jewish?
They're not second-class Jews in theory, but in practice they're not necessarily treated as 100% members of the community of Judaism. But that doesn't affect anything. They still are received in the synagogue as fully belonging Israelites.
Okay. Let's see, here you say, you say, the pitiful condition of Israel is, this is generally speaking, historically I think, turned into the primary testimony and vindication of Israel's faith. That Israel suffers is the best assurance of divine concern. So you're saying that as long as the Jews suffer, as long as Jews are suffering, they have a recognition that God is favoring them or giving them special attention or something? I mean, how would you frame that?
I don't know. I'd have to see the context of that.
Okay. Okay, here you say the Torah is based on genealogy. Could you discuss that? The idea of being born from a Jewish mother. How important is that?
That defines who is a Jew. And
so it's genealogical to some degree?
Yeah, it passes on through the mother.
Okay. Okay, I've heard that there have been many Jewish apostates throughout the centuries in Europe and otherwise who contributed to anti-Semitism. Do you know anything about that? Jews who left the community and became actively working against the Jewish community. Could you address that?
There are cases in medieval times, in Spain, for example, where the convert from Judaism to Christianity advocated the repression of Judaism. That's why they destroyed the Talmud. They said that the Talmud contains the Torah that keeps Jews Jewish. So they should burn the Talmud, and that would end Judaism. And that was a case in the 13th century.
And that was a former Jewish individual who elicited that, or?
Yes.
Do you recall his name?
No, I don't.
Okay. Could you discuss where the term scapegoat comes from? I mean,
it comes from Leviticus, from the book of Leviticus. it deals with the Day of Atonement, and the scapegoat is sent out to carry the sins of the community on his head, and he's killed as an atonement for the sins of the community. That's the scapegoat.
Okay, given this kind of religious history, what are the factors in your view that led so many persons of Jewish heritage into socialist movements and so forth in Eastern Europe? Can you trace any kind of factor or teaching, or is it a sociological phenomenon, or what's your opinion about that?
The social idealism of the socialists appealed to the Jews and made promises to them that were never kept. But the teachings of the socialists were very attractive to secular Jews. It gave them a sense of it defined what they could achieve to make a better world.
Does Zionism have roots in Judaism? Would you find any parallels? Is there are there any special aspects of Zionism that are distinctly having origin, perhaps, in Judaism? Could you elaborate?
Yes, the plan of Judaism is the plan of Holocaust and redemption, or exile and redemption, exile and return. And Zionism identifies an exile, the Golah, and promises a return to Zion. So it teaches the most classical version of Judaism, in teaching that the Jews are in exile and should return to the Holy Land.
Okay. Why, you wrote about this a little bit too, why did the Holocaust become so, why was so much attention paid to it many, many years after it actually occurred? I guess they say in the 1970s is when attention to it really took off, whereas immediately after it was not paid much attention to. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so, the 1967 war made the difference. Until the 1967 war, the Holocaust was part of the world of Judaism, but it was not the source of emotions. But in '67, there was the prospect of the destruction of the State of Israel, and the outcome of the impending disaster was a great victory, and it made the Holocaust. It kept it completed the story of the Holocaust, because then you had the destruction followed by the restoration.
I want to ask you this, please. In the Torah, the Old Testament, there are various references to genocides against the Canaanites, I guess, and other peoples. And the idea is to go, directed by God, as I understand it, the Israelites are to go in and kill every man, woman, and child for that land, that space. How is that material treated by the Jewish community and the Christian community? That kind of religious teaching. How does in our modern day and age, how is that understood?
It's repudiated.
Even though it's claimed to be directed by God, how is it repudiated if it's part of the sacred text?
It's taught. It's not taught as an ideal of contemporary conduct.
Is it possible? It seems like that's almost a template for the Holocaust. right? Would you agree or disagree? And if so, if you agree, if you disagree, why would it not? It's very similar. It doesn't have the mechanization. It doesn't have the it doesn't have the numbers, but the premise is the same, is it not?
Genocide is genocide, whoever commits it.
Okay. Let's see. Could you discuss the conflicts between Reform and Orthodox Judaism after emancipation? The kind of troubles or the debates they had?
Well, the issue was whether you could change anything. And Reform Judaism taught that change was characteristic of Judaism. And you have to keep things up to date. And Orthodoxy said that change is forbidden by the Torah.
So in that regard, do Orthodox Jews participate very much or at all in interfaith dialogues?
Some Orthodox rabbis participate in interfaith dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
But these are mainly activities important to Reform and conservative rabbis.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Could you give me a very sort of succinct overview for people who don't know the religious delineations? You have Reform, Conservative, and basically Orthodox, correct? And Reconstructionists. Could you just give me a brief overview of those groups?
Reform Judaism began in the 19th century. And it taught that Judaism should be updated. It precipitated the organization of Orthodox Judaism, which reaffirmed the tradition without change. And a mediating system, conservative Judaism, came into being to affirm the tradition in the context of change. Reconstructionism is a chapter in conservative Judaism, which produced a theology of a naturalist theology instead of a supernaturalist theology.
In Orthodoxy, of course.
Orthodoxy affirmed the tradition.
And what about so-called ultra-Orthodoxy? How is that distinct?
There are two Orthodox patterns. One is a pattern of segregation or self-segregation, and the other is a pattern of Torah integrated into the everyday life.
And the ultra-Orthodox?
The Orthodox are divided into modern Orthodox, who are integrationists and believe that you can live in the common culture and keep the Torah.
Okay, if we were to step back into, say, the 14th century, and you were walking down the street, what would the Jewish community look like? And I mean, not literally look, but what would it be?
I don't understand your question.
You know, and I'm thinking in terms of the special dress, or they say the special foods. How would the Jewish community be distinct from this surrounding environment, surrounding people?
Well, it would be different. It depends where. In Spain, they spoke a common language. In Poland, they didn't.
In Spain, they spoke Spanish? Or?
The Portuguese also.
Okay.
When they left Spain in 1492, they continued to speak Spanish.
Do you have any idea of the numbers of the Haredim in Eastern Europe up to World War II?
No, but they were a very substantial proportion of the Jewish community.
And influential too?
Yes.
And in what ways were they influential? In terms of
They defined everyday life.
Could you discuss the issue of Judaism in Introduction in 2002, a fairly recent book you did? You talk about idolatry and Gentiles and how Gentiles are identified in traditional Jewish teachings with idolatry. Could you discuss that, please?
This is how you define a Gentile. A Gentile is a person who worships an idol.
Okay. Well, you also say what defines the Gentiles, the lack of Torah, explains also why their very character requires them to hate Israel, the people of the Torah. Would you elaborate on that belief? Why would that be?
The Torah is what differentiates the Israelite from the Gentile. And the Talmud tells the story that the Gentiles had the opportunity to affirm the Torah and rejected it.
But you say their very character requires them to hate Israel. So it actually is that strong in Jewish belief that by definition the Gentile would hate Israel? Hate the Torah?
This is in the Talmud, in the tractate on idolatry.
Would you like some water?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He may, yeah.
Would you?
Yes.
Okay. So that was interrupted there. So essentially that the belief is that by definition an idolater hates Israel?
Yes. That's in the Talmud tractate Avodah Zarah on idolatry.
Okay. Well, per our discussion before, is that an opinion or is that something that's taken as normative?
That's an opinion.
Okay. Okay. You note this, and you ask, how can justice be thought to order the world if the Gentiles rule and not the Israelites, the Jewish community? What's the belief system behind that? Or how does the Jewish community or the Israelite community reconcile the fact that the Jewish community does not rule? There are more Gentiles than there are Jews and Israelites.
This is based on the notion that God wants humanity to build the society described in the Torah. And the Gentiles reject the Torah, so they reject God.
And what about, there's Noahide laws? There are some.
Noahide, from the children of Noah.
Could you discuss those laws? Those are Gentiles who accept those are better off?
The Gentiles who accept the laws of Noah are keeping the commandments of the Torah that are assigned to them. Not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to commit cruelty to animals, not to worship idols.
What is the idea of birthright? Could you elaborate on that in the Jewish community? What's the idea of birthright?
I don't know the answer to that.
I know there's a program even called Birthright where some people fly, any Jewish young people want to go to Israel or something.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about.
Okay. Then in terms of Jewish theology, Orthodox theology, if if Gentiles are a vehicle for God's will, how is the Holocaust explained?
It can't be explained.
Can you elaborate on what's the discussion in the Jewish community then? Is that a rupture in the religious faith for many?
It's created a theological crisis, which hasn't been resolved.
And could you elaborate on that crisis? Why is it a crisis?
Because how can you explain the murder of 6 million men, women, and children as God's will?
Okay. Could you elaborate on, as I understand it, there's the tradition of Isaac and Ishmael, and I think Ishmael is considered by the Arab community to be their ancestor. Is that? And could you elaborate on that? The dichotomy, the tradition between Isaac and Ishmael.
This is the part of the same pattern as Jacob and Esau, and the Quran has Ishmael as the ancestor of Muhammad, of Islam.
Okay, so then ironically, whether we're speaking of Isaac and Ishmael, or Jacob and Esau, or even Amalek, all these individuals who become others, or are anti-Semites, or have ancestral lineage to the Jewish people, right? I mean, they're cousins. Could you elaborate on that?
What's to elaborate?
Well, who they were and what they, who are these people? The issue of the farther you go back, it seems like the more you find all these conflicts, these individuals claim even, the same Abraham. Everybody claims Abraham as the progenitor, right? So I guess it's a question of where do these conflicts come from? What are we talking about? Why are there such huge gulfs when everybody claims this common ancestor?
Because they're claiming to the favor of the ancestor, and there's competition for divine favor.